Thanks for joining us for Profile. I'm Ian Boyne, your host. Today we speak to Dr. Andrew Spencer, who is the director of the Center for Hotel and Tourism Management, UWI Nassau, Bahamas campus. He holds the record from the #1 tourism school in the world, the University of Boyne in Britain. He holds the record there as the person who graduated in the shortest possible time for the PhD. This is while studying under the world's leading authority in tourism and technology. He also had a very good master's thesis in Jamaica, and in fact he had the highest grade in the tourism school in that year. His PhD thesis from the University of Bournemouth was rated the #1 thesis for that year of all the tourism schools. He's only 34. He went to study at the Center for Hotel and Tourism Management 10 years ago, and now at 34, he's the director of that center. Another outstanding Jamaican featured on Profile. We thank you so much for your company. Good to have you, Andrew. It's good to catch you on one of your visits here. Quite an outstanding set of achievements. University of Bournemouth and University of Surrey switched places from year to year as a #1 university in the field of tourism. And you have set this outstanding record of finishing a PhD in 2 years. It had never been done. The person who had the record before had done it, what, 3 years?
In 3 years. In 3 years.
In 3 years?
Yes, I mean, I had no choice, Ian, to be honest. I mean, I went there. I didn't have money. I went there with limited funding. I got funding from my employer at the time, University of West Indies. And that funding would cover about a year and a half of what was supposed to be a 3-year program at minimum. So I told myself I had to go there and I had to complete it in the fastest time. Now remember, even when doing it in 2 years, the last part of that program would have had to be out of pocket from me. So I had no choice but to complete. So even when I went there and I sat down with my supervisors on day one, and I told him I wanted to complete in the minimum time, he said, well, the minimum time is 3, but I give you 4.
Give you 4?
I give you 4. I give you 4.
That's what he said.
Because that's the average time in which most people are able to complete such a program. So I knew I had to do it. But my wife came with me and she had a full-time job. She was working 10 hours a day for 4 days a week. And every time she went out to work, I sat down in front of that computer and I handled the thesis because I knew it had to be a full-time task for me.
Yeah. And you were ahead with your schedule? You were ahead of your deadlines? I
was always strategizing, and I often said to people that I really supervise my supervisors. Because, you know, these guys have these ideas of when you should submit some things. And when they tell me I need to submit something in July, I remember there was one document I was supposed to submit July 14, and I had the document ready at the end of May. But I knew that if I had sent it to them too early, they might have questioned the quality of it. So I held on to the document for a little bit. And then I sent it off to them later on. And the document, they thought it was excellent quality. And they said I must have spent a long time working on this document. But I knew what I wanted. I knew what I was going there to do. And I had a sense of what I was going to do. The danger of that PhD program is if you don't have that kind of focus, you could end up at it for a very long time. And I didn't want to be in that position.
You went with that focus.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
And what will be interesting to viewers is that you wasted a lot of time at Wilmer's. You did bad. You had to repeat fourth form.
Yes, yes.
You were almost kicked out of Wilmer's. How you made that transition is extraordinary. Let's talk about that period of waywardness and just listlessness.
Well, my father always thought I was a brilliant young man, and he would always say that I had no excuse for not doing well in school. So I actually did very well. It was a common entrance era. Went straight into Wolmer's.
It was Dunrobin Primary.
Dunrobin Primary. Went into Wolmer's. First form, got very good grades.
You did?
By second form, I started discovering that there were other things that were exciting. And so the grades started to plummet. By the time the grades started to fall, got to third form, I was failing. By third form, you're doing the most number of courses because they want to see what you're going to do in CXC.
Yes.
And I failed a number of courses. Anyway, went to fourth form. Fourth form is a time when the teacher no longer comes to you, you go to the teacher. You're now going to your classes because you've selected what courses you're doing for CSEC.
Yes.
Well, CXC at the time. And so it was easy to scull. So I started first by sculling classes.
Skull class?
Yeah, I found a tree at the school, a group of us would scull classes. And then sculling classes turned into sculling school. I mean, I don't even know if my parents know this about me to this very
first
day.
time.
Yeah, probably the first time they're hearing this. But I used to actually show up to school. My parents would drop me at
Drop you at school?
I reached the school. You enter at a particular gate. There's a basketball court. And I'd come on the basketball court, hang out a little bit, meet some friends, and we just decide where we're going for the day. I would just walk right back through the gate before the security closes the gate. So I would show up for school. My parents think I'm at school on a given day, and I go home. In that same year, I actually didn't do some of my end-of-year exams because I didn't go to class. So I thought if I'm not going to class, then why should I sit the exam and get a horrible grade? It's better to get 0.
Yes.
But I didn't quite think about how I was going to explain that to the parents.
That's what I'm thinking.
And then that very summer, actually, some aunts took me to New York, and my parents called me and said, you know, your grades are so deplorable that you're going to have to resit 4th form. And I said, no.
Humiliating.
I need to go to a different school because I can't go back in the class with these people. I mean, people who used to look up to me as a 4th former who were in 3rd form, I'm not going to be in the same class with them. My friends who even did worse than me. It's interesting. I had friends who did worse than me, who were promoted to 5th form. But I was held back, and it was for a reason, because I think that the delay in time was important. And I made it through, did CXCs. Even in that same 4th form time, I was very good at English. So I did English from the end of 4th form, got a 1 for it, and I thought everything else would be a breeze. Did my other subjects, got the other 6, so I ended up with 7 CXC subjects. My father still wasn't pleased, though, because he thought I was capable of so much better. So at the time, I felt good because it got me into 6th form. Went to 6th form, wasted lower 6.
Wasted time still?
Wasted time, and I was put on probation. I was told that if my grades didn't change in a particular term, I would be asked not to come back to upper 6. Yeah? So I did just enough again to make it to upper 6. Got to upper 6, and I actually did okay at my A-levels because I was able to get into UWI. Interestingly, when I went, I was doing literatures and English. Because I wanted to get into Carmack. I thought I was going to be a journalist like you.
Is that so? That's
so
interesting.
I did the Carmack test, but you know they only take 50 people.
Yes.
So if you don't get into that 50, they give you the next best thing in the Faculty of Arts and Humanities. So I got literatures and English, and I did that in A-levels. But I did 1 year of that and knew that, I thought about it. I knew I wanted to be a university academic. And I thought about pursuing it in that area. And I said, maybe if I were to pursue everything and go to a PhD in that faculty, I may do that. But then I fell in love with the idea of tourism. And so I did a faculty transfer. Yet another delay in my life, because it means that a degree which should have been 3 years ended up being 4 years, because I did 1 year of literatures and English before transferring to the Faculty of Social Sciences. So I did that, went through that degree, discovered I had a thirst for knowledge. I did a course called Introduction to Logic. That's
in philosophy.
Philosophy.
That's Buwaji, right?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Loved that course so much. And when friends of mine were complaining about it, and I can't
to recondite. You loved it?
I loved it.
Yes.
And so I started loving that. I started loving things like statistics, which I was told had the highest, failure rate over in SOCI. And I was teaching people stats before the final exam. And I started doing well, but I started doing well a little late. So I actually finished that degree, and I missed the first class honors by 1A.
Just 1A?
1A, and I think that's what shook me up. I mean, these guys know it's by GPA. Then it was the number of A's, and I missed it by 1A.
Just 1A? And
that shook me up, and it was no looking back after that. I decided, clearly I'm much smarter than I thought.
Yes.
You know, so.
And when you went for the Masters, you did excellently?
I did very well in the Masters. Yes, and I went straight to the final course, which was my thesis. And I actually got the highest grade for that thesis. And I had a supervisor who didn't really give A's for thesis. And that was an accomplished researcher. And she thought my research paper was very good. And I got an A for that. And so I thought, you know, had I known this before, I might have been doing better from before. But all things happen in their own time. Yes.
The Andrew Spencer story is now the director at the Center for Hotel and Tourism Management in Nassau, Bahamas. That's the UA center. Just 10 years ago, he was there as a student. And he's now the youngest head of the center, the only student to have gone back to head the center. There are more extraordinary things about him. We'll tell you when we come back from our first break on Profile. Welcome back. Dr. Andrew Spencer is the author of this book, The Leadership Imperative, technology adoption and strategic management in travel firms in Jamaica. That came as a result of his PhD thesis, voted the thesis of the year at the University of Beaumont, which switches with the University of Surrey as the top tourism school in the UK, and certainly one of the top in the world, because the UK tourism schools are the leading tourism schools in the world. And you went to work with the top authority.
Oh, yes.
This is the man you were reading about when you were doing your master's thesis, and you say you want to study under him.
Every time I read something, it had the name Demetrius Bohalis.
Yes.
And I knew he was at the University of Surrey. So I made contact with someone I knew at Surrey. And this is before I knew anything about where I was going to get money to go and do a PhD overseas.
Yes?
Yeah, I called her and I said, because we were planning a conference together, and I said to her, Bohalis works with you. She said, he used to be a few doors down from me, but he's gone to Bournemouth. And I said, do you have a contact for him? She said, send me something. I sent her a proposal. She sent it to him. And he wrote back to me to say, this is some good work. It's interesting. But if you're going to come here, stop what you're doing right now. Because he wanted to take me in a completely different direction. And you know the kind of forthrightness you'll get from someone who's Greek.
Is he Greek?
So he told me, stop what you're doing if you're going to come. And he called. We did the telephone interviews. I got in. And he said, but we have no money to give you.
And you had no money of
your
own?
I had no money of my own, certainly. So I actually did something that was unprecedented. I requested a meeting with the then principal of the Mona campus for UWI.
Yes, Gordon Shirley.
Yes, walked into his office and I said, you know, I need to go off and do this PhD program. I have no money. And he says, well, we don't have any facility that's set up specifically for that. So I said, well, can we make an exception here? And he told me, get support from the necessary people. I got the support, got those letters back in, and I got the money.
You got the money?
I got the money in pounds to go off and study in a loan, in the form of a loan. But I didn't care whether it was money I had to pay back or not. I knew I wanted to get this PhD. So I'm very persistent. And a lot of people said I was a little too confident to stroll into the office. And yeah, I know, but I knew I had to get to do this program.
And you are like that. If you think something is worthwhile enough, you will invest everything in it.
Absolutely. I don't believe in missed opportunities. I think if you're going to tell me no, then I'll handle the no. Rejection is sometimes not easy to handle, but I'll deal with that.
You'll deal with
I'd much rather deal with rejection than the thought that I could have asked and didn't ask. So I'm always going to make sure that an opportunity doesn't miss me by. You know, so
you're going to ask, you're going to push for that door to open.
I mean, if people were to describe me, they would say that they think I'm a very determined individual. That's certainly how my wife describes me.
Yes. What role does confidence play in your life?
It's very, very important. I mean, I'm in a job where I have to do public speaking all the time. So confidence, I mean, you have to walk into a room, you have to command the room. People have to know that you know what you're talking about. If you claim to be an expert in a particular field and you have a doctorate in the area, you have to speak with confidence about that. And even before I got the PhD, I remember when I had to teach my first class at UWI, I had nerves right up to when I got to the lecture theatre. And the moment I walked into the lecture theatre and saw the students, instantly it went away. Because I knew what I had to do. I was just energized by seeing the audience. I like having an audience. And I don't mind speaking to that audience. So confidence has played a huge role.
How did you finance the master's program?
I had to take a full-time job while doing the master's program.
A full-time job?
Yes, I had to take a full-time job. I went back to my alma mater, Wolmer's Boys, and I taught English language and literature for 2 years while I did the master's, and that's how I funded it.
You have also taught at UWI here. You've lectured at UWI.
Right. Yes, I lectured in tourism management in the Department of Management Studies at UWI for a few years before I went off to do the PhD. And then when I got back, I taught for a year before taking up the directorship in the Bahamas.
Yes. When you thought of taking up that directorship, I mean, I would imagine that the competition for the job must have been intense. There must have been a number of leading people, highly accomplished people who were vying for that job.
Certainly.
You were just, what, 33 that time?
I was 33 at the time. I just got back.
You had the confidence to feel that you could...
I did. I applied. I mean, I knew the job. I knew that there was the vacancy for a head.
Yeah.
And I always wanted to go back to the center.
Actually,
I wanted to go back there as a lecturer.
Yeah.
When I graduated in 2003, I said, I want to come back here and lecture.
Okay.
You know? I didn't know I was going to go back as the director of the place.
Yes.
But when the job was advertised and I looked at the criteria for the job, I thought, I can do this.
You can do it.
If somebody can look past my youth, I can do these things, you know, and I had a vision for the center. So when I went into that interview and I saw people in the waiting area who were about to be interviewed, it could have been daunting.
Yes,
oh, yes. But I decided I was just going to go in there and do my best interview. And I received a call that you are selected as the director.
And you now would be supervising people who were there when you went as a student.
It's actually interesting. My personal assistant right now was the person who registered me when I went as an undergrad years ago. Yes. So, and a lot of the staff as well, academic and admin, would have been there when I was an undergrad student.
So many people who taught you.
Oh yes.
You are now their boss.
Oh yes. Oh yes. And it's an environment that's welcoming. I found that people were happy to see me come back. And they used to refer to me as Andrew because I was the vice president of the student exec then, so I had to deal with admin a lot.
Yes.
And they've now seen me come back and they're happy to call me Dr. Spencer. And in fact, they throw the word around jokingly, boss.
Yes.
And I come in and say, yeah, he's my boss.
Yes,
you know, but
so they celebrate your success?
They celebrate my success. I have a team that celebrates my success.
Yes.
And so we get along very well, and we've got, in the year I've been there, we've got a lot of things done because we have that team spirit going.
Yes. What are your own thoughts on the strategic direction of tourism in Jamaica? What was your analysis of what we're doing and what, if anything, we need to do differently?
Right. I think we're doing things much better than when I started studying tourism. I had far more criticisms when I just started studying tourism than today. But I think we still have too much emphasis on our arrival figures rather than our expenditures. I'm sure people have heard that before. And that's in part because we have a mass marketing approach that doesn't necessarily focus
But
on...
the foreign exchange retention has been increasing.
Yes, it has. It has. And in some ways, and so I'm saying we're doing better than we were doing before. But one of the issues is that the model of tourism that we practice is slightly different from other leading tourism destinations.
Tell us, what's different?
As a supply pull factor, the biggest pull factor is supposed to be attractions.
Attractions.
The attractions are what ensure that the small man on the street gets some money.
Yes.
The attractions are what ensures that people see more of what is authentic Jamaica.
Yes.
Our model is more accommodations driven. And so the popularity of our destination is driven by the big name accommodation.
Sandals.
Yes. And so that means in large part that what people are paying for are rooms and experiences where those rooms are located rather than the real Jamaica.
And we have enough attractions to
pull
people.
We have in excess of 100 recognized attractions internationally.
And this would compare well with other leading destinations.
Absolutely. And it goes back to the type of tourists you try to attract as well. Because if
you're
going
for more high-end tourists.
And not just high-end, just in terms of a psychographic factor. You have some people who are psychocentric travelers who will come and they want that package deal. The allocentrics want something that's authentic. They want to move with the people. They want to be able to connect. They want to know what real Jamaica is. Yes. And those are typically bigger spenders.
Our tourism officials talk about going in that area, but we're talking tourism, we're talking about the life of Dr. Andrew Spencer, 34, highly accomplished Jamaican. He has more to tell us when we come back from a final break. Dr. Andrew Spencer holds the record as the graduate who finished his PhD thesis in the shortest time, 2 years, at the famed University of Bournemouth in Britain. He's here with us on Profile. So you're saying we need to do more with our tourism profile?
Certainly. There's so much more that we can sell, and we need to do a better job of how we package what we sell. There's a lot of value.
So there's much more we could be earning from tourism?
Certainly. We've not optimized the earnings from tourism at all. We look at countries like Bermuda that have done a fantastic job of pulling the dollar from the tourist's pocket, but that's also because of the tourists you attract. So if you don't attract a particular kind of tourist, you're unable to get the dollar from their pocket.
So why haven't our officials seen this, Andrew?
I
it
think
seems so
they've seen
clear.
it.
But why? What's the obstacle to going that path?
I think because there are some things that are a little bit more expedient. And there are some things that look good. As an indicator, I would love to be able to say that tourist arrival figures have gone up. It looks good. So we now have 5 million tourists as opposed to 4 or 3 in previous years. So that looks good. So the indicators that are more visible and the things that will resonate more with the public are the things that people will tout, and therefore you go in that direction.
But you're saying to be better to have the 4 million tourists who spend far more
Absolutely.
than the 5 million.
Certainly, certainly. So the multiplier effect would be enhanced if you have more people spending.
Yes. What are you and people like you who have the expertise doing to make that expertise available to the government of Jamaica, other governments in the region? Well,
I suppose I'm guilty of a lot of what academics are guilty of. I mean, I publish extensively in referee journals. Yes. I've spoken a lot about these things. There was even a paper we did years ago about Jamaica and advertising expenditure for tourism and how it increased exponentially. But the returns on that exponential advertising budget
you have done that work?
Were not seen. We did that in 2010.
Yes.
And that's, I suppose, what
so all these big advertising budgets don't really yield the kinds of...
It's interesting if I tell you what the finding was from our regression model. It would shock people.
Well,
what we found was that the biggest thing that drove the increase in arrival figures over a 30-year period was actually the exchange rate.
The exchange rate?
The exchange rate.
Well,
no, we wouldn't want to hear that, though, because
well,
the truth is, the devaluation of your dollar is essentially saying to somebody who comes with $1 where they can get more for that $1.
So that was what drove...
That's what drove it. People felt like they were getting more
Wasn't
bang
the
for
ads
their
we're seeing with Sandals on CNN?
It wasn't the most significant, statistically significant factor at all. So that's one of the things, you know. So it's interesting. And also, we tend to have cheaper hotel rooms than other places in the Caribbean. So we have a cheap product, and people feel like they can get more bang for the buck, so they'll come.
But you say that strategy doesn't work out, because one would think, well, yes, you get the large numbers and the money will somehow pan out because people will come, rather than having these high prices that will scare off people.
Right. I wouldn't say it doesn't work. I would say that it plateaus after a point, because you can get so much and no more. After a while, you're exceeding carrying capacity, and you're still not getting the kinds of money that you would like to be earning from the industry. So it gets flat at a point.
Yeah. You are a person who has walked off a lucrative job because you're a Sabbath keeper. You belong to the Church of God Seventh-day. You grew up in a very strict environment. No wonder you rebelled early. My psychoanalysis. And you were so strict in terms of your religious scruples that you walked off a job. Okay, your industry is a 24-hour, 7-day a week. Interestingly.
Which is why I ended up in the academic side.
It's safer for you there.
It's far safer.
Yeah.
I often say to people, I hold my values dear. So if you hold a value, you need to have some standards with it. And if you don't even understand why I do what I do, I'm going to live up to that standard. And one of my standards is that I keep the 7th-day Sabbath. And there was a job, a very lucrative management position that I got. And I was supposed to be at the corporate office. When I got the job, I would have to do the rounds in the other offices so that I would know what happens on the ground. And I remember somebody walked up to me and said, how comes we've never seen you work on a Friday night? And I said, because that's the schedule. And the general manager at the time decided I had to work at least one Friday night, because he said you don't get the full experience because it's the busiest night. And the HR manager sat with me and she said, go talk to your pastor, man. I said, well, this is not between my pastor and me. This is between me and my personal conviction about something. And in any case, my father would have been the pastor anyway. So, so she said to me, well, we're going to have to part ways. It was a probationary period. And she said, I had a company vehicle at the time. I sold my car because I got a company vehicle. And she said, we can't even allow you to drive out with the vehicle. You have to leave the key with me right here. Take your things out of the vehicle. She said, you want me to call you a taxi? I said, no, I'll call one myself. And so subordinates, people who were reporting to me, had to watch me scrape things out of the SUV under my arm and call a taxi and leave the premises. I had no job.
You You refuse to work for one Friday night against your belief?
No, because if I do it once, then I can do it 100 times, can't I? And that's how I view it. It's just a standard that I
So you stick with your values?
Yeah, I do.
And they have worked for you?
Yes.
Great. Andrew Spencer, an outstanding young Jamaican at 34. He's the director of the Center for Hotel and Tourism Management, UWI, Nassau, Bahamas. We continue to feature people like Andrew on Profile. Stay tuned with us. Next week I'll be back. Until then, Ian Boyne wishing you a very pleasant and a very productive week.